Okay, so let me start in a strange place. Cambridge Introduction says that Rousseau had two heroes, the best person and the wisest person, the best man and the wisest man. The best man was Cato the Younger. Cato the Younger, Caton младший, right? So who is this a member of a senate of the degenerating Roman, well, of the era where the Roman Republic was degenerating and was turning into a principate, right? So Cato the Younger is the is the vision of civic virtue. So Cato the Younger is the ultimate true citizen. Cato the Younger. It's interesting because doesn't Locke write about Cato, the one who went into the theater just to go out again? Anyway. But the second is the wisest person. And this is Socrates. And so Cato is the, what's the right phrase, is the paragon, the apotheosis, let's say paragon. Cato is the paragon of civic virtue, and Socrates is the paragon of private virtue. And it's like, let me give you the conclusion and I'll try to reason to this conclusion. The conclusion is this. Modern problems require modern solutions. Modern problems require modern solutions. So it's like Rousseau begins the Discourse on the Origin of Inequality with this vision of the state of nature, which is perfectly harmonious and fine. And and there's no reason to leave the state of nature. It's very important to keep this in mind. There's absolutely no reason to leave the state of nature. And maybe in some sense, human beings are, at least in some sense, are as happy as they can be in the state of nature. Or at least, well, we'll get to the citizen. And Socrates is an attempt through private life to try to go back to that kind of state of nature. So again, Rousseau is very adamant. And we'll talk about this because probably it's a good idea for me to redraw the schema from last time. We leave the state of nature for structural reasons. You hopefully will remember this. So do you remember what's the first thing that drives us out of the state of nature? Somebody? Yes, population growth. Exactly. Population growth. And you see, you cannot reverse population growth. I mean, at least this is not in the cards for Rousseau. He doesn't entertain these possibilities. So since you cannot reverse population growth and also technology and also the change in culture, also the change in human nature, because again, remember, the state of nature is a state before human beings begin to speak. So, and again, Rousseau is writing before Darwin. So are these humans, are they really Homo sapiens, or are we talking about some other kind of species? So, like maybe you can destroy 95% of the population and in this sense reverse the population growth, but you cannot really devolve back into, orangutans or something like that. Orangutans are actually an example that Rousseau uses somewhere when he talks about, the state of nature. Anyway, so what I'm saying is that, again, going back to the state of nature is not in the cards. It is impossible. However, an individual, and this is, if you want, this is an anti-political solution to a political problem. What is the political problem? The political problem is simple. Society is bad. Society is bad. This is the political problem. Now, the apolitical solution to this political problem is that an individual, by being somebody like a poet, living their private life, deriving their happiness from the sentiment of their own existence as much as possible, can attempt to locally, partially, go back in their head to the state of nature. Well, I mean, you could imagine a person living like a hermit somewhere in the countryside. Or somebody like Socrates, who lives in the middle of Athens, but who does not subscribe to the customs of Athens, who lives a very unconventional lifestyle. Or maybe you can think of someone like Diogenes, hopefully you remember from last year. Diogenes, who very famously lived like a bomb, lived like a hobo in a barrel, right? So there's this kind of possibility. And this is one potential solution, but this is not a surefire solution. Because even if you try to live like that, society may intrude. Again, in the state of nature, if somebody's trying to interfere with you, you can always just run away. In the state of nature, the population is so sparse and resources are so vast that in the state of nature, if somebody accosts you, you can always just run away. in society, this does not necessarily work. So, I mean, Rousseau himself, to some extent, tried to live like Socrates or like Diogenes, and he was prevented by people who were after his blood. And Rousseau was paranoid. I mean, he was mentally ill to some extent, yeah, and he was paranoid. And David Hume, who was his friend and was very sympathetic to Rousseau at one point, said that his impression of Rousseau was of a man so sensitive that it was as if Rousseau had no skin. The skin was taken and was stripped from his bare body, and like the gentlest touch he would feel with acuteness. Like this was Hume's impression of Rousseau. So anyway, I mean, Rousseau was partially, very idiosyncratic in terms of his mental life, but also people really hated him, and many people would prefer to see him dead. Like if you are paranoid, it doesn't mean that you're not being followed. So this resulted in the fact that his life was really tumultuous. I mean, not to mention that, of course, when Rousseau got older and when he was sort of got older and wiser and more in control of his life, yeah, he tried to maybe escape into the countryside. But when he was young, when he was a child, what could he do with his life? Nothing. He was at the mercy of his parents. And many of his troubles resulted from his troubled childhood, something, which he had no control over. So it's like, yeah, some people can become like Socrates or like Diogenes, but you need to be lucky with the place you're born. You need to win in a roulette wheel of reincarnation. Which family you're going to be born into and what kind of education you're going to get. So this is like the ancient problem had an ancient solution, which is a state of nature, which is there is no problem and you don't need a solution. Just life naturally is good. But then, through the story, which I'll talk about right now, we degenerate into this horrible condition of the bourgeois, and Rousseau is adamant that, again, it's better off being dead than being a bourgeois. Well, again, if you write about this on university, be careful around these words, but I will keep using this careless formulation, that Rousseau is adamant about that. And so, once we get to the cutoff point, once you get to this cutoff point, basically the age of, I don't want to say age of modernity begins, but here's where the rules of the game change, and you can no longer go back as a society, so your only consistent option is to go forward. Now, I feel that Rousseau is going to say that the citizen is better than a savage. Like the citizen is indeed more noble than a savage, a more perfected kind of existence. But the trouble is that the savage was naturally happy. And most savages were naturally happy automatically. Whereas for the citizens, first of all, very few people will be citizens. Because again, Rousseau is talking about a certain idealized model, much more so than, for example, Hobbes did. So we are talking about an idealized model of this true social contract, which almost never appears. Okay? Rousseau is going to give very few examples, like maybe ancient Rome, ancient Sparta, and Geneva. Although when he talks Calvin's Geneva, he's probably imagining things. Likewise, when he talks about ancient Rome and ancient Sparta, he's reading documents. And I mean, I'm sure that at least to some extent, Rousseau has to understand that in reality, life was not as good as it was portrayed in the books. Anyway, so what I'm trying to say is that you see, in some important sense, being a savage is a surefire way. Whereas being a Socrates or a Cato requires a lot of luck. Everybody was a noble savage, but only few people with a lot of luck can be a Socrates or a Cato. Being a Socrates, again, requires a fortunate birth and fortunate education and a measure of self-control, because if you're born a slave, I don't know, in African colonies or American colonies, no way in seven hells you're going to be able to become either a Socrates or a Cato. And then, again, even if you are lucky and you are born in a virtuous republic, like Cato's Rome, well, although Cato's Rome was no longer virtuous, but let's say in, like Lycurgus's Sparta, right? Even if you are lucky to be born there, still, if the divine Sparta and Rome fell, no country can hope to last forever. This is Rousseau, again, echoing Hobbes, says that the same way that every human being will die, the same way every society will die, including the most virtuous, the best societies of all. I should talk about this word virtue at some point. Okay, probably not now. But we need to talk about this and we need to define it because it's a complicated word and different people use it for different purposes. Hobbes mostly doesn't use the word virtue at all. It doesn't mean much for him. For Rousseau, it is an important word, and we'll get there.
Is that transition from savage to citizen possible, like, without the middle stage?
Yeah, that's an interesting technical question. Students ask this every year. The short answer is this is like not the way Rousseau thinks about this, because we used to be savages, and then the way he writes this on Discourse on Equality, we all became bourgeois, and like maybe on a distant planet in an alternative universe, this transition could be possible, but like it's not the reality we live in. What was our position last year? Like, I mean, in order to be a true citizen, you need language, you need culture, you need institutions of property, and like you need a miraculous amount of luck to just go straight from savage to the citizen without this stage of the bourgeois. In some sense, in the ideal circumstance, if you do get from savage to the citizen, these are necessary growing pains. Something like that. Although, I mean, again, if you think of the person of the lawgiver. So if you think when Rousseau was writing the Constitution for the island of Corsica, or maybe imagine Rousseau writing a constitution for the savages of North America. If these savages are lucky to have a magnificent lawgiver who has all the right tricks up his sleeve, then yeah, individual savage tribe can transition to true citizens through the help of the legislator. And in fact, this is actually the best condition. Because it seems that, because Rousseau is adamant that once, sort of the people can only be shaped when they are young. When the people, narod, when the cultural history of the people, when it progresses up to a certain point, like there's this natural degeneracy. Every people degenerates over time. So it can only be like, you have to mold it when it's young. So like Moses molded the Jewish people when they were young, when they were almost barbarians. Or like Kyrgyz molded the Spartans when they were young. Or let's say Mohammed took the Arabic tribes and molded them while they were young. So you're only, so in some sense, I don't know, requires a more careful reading of the text, but these are the things we have to keep in mind. Okay, so I'm sure there's a million things to say, but you know what? Let me get on the board. Let me get our basic schema, and then we'll see. Then we'll see what else we need. So, yeah. So we begin with the state of nature. And this is, again, immediately, remember, so this is the important question, how do you write about this on the University of London exam? If you have two questions, one about the state of nature, the other one about the social contract, this is already some first tentative attempt at giving a plan for the University of London answer. So we begin with the state of nature. So the state of nature is a condition when there's no scarcity, no language, no property, no families, and no society. So if you want, it's a condition before we have scarcity, language, families, society, and property. Let me try to write this. So again, maybe in kind of a different color. So there is no scarcity, no language, no property, no family, and no society. So we're talking about a state before all these things appear. So how does Rousseau know about all this?
But it is real historical.
No. He imagines never reconstruction.
Let's be careful. Rousseau thinks it is the best reconstruction. So he thinks it's real in the same way that when scientists talk about dinosaurs today. I mean, we haven't seen the dinosaurs, okay? We don't have a time machine. But this is based on the fossil record. This is our best reconstruction. So Rousseau she writes about this. He says that I have read this account in the book of nature which never lies. And Rousseau says immediately, maybe I have inadvertently made some mistakes. He writes this in the introduction to the Discourse on Equality, but I tried my best. So he thinks this is the best reconstruction. And he bases this reconstruction by looking at human children, animals. Yes, and savage tribes. Animals and savage tribes. Now, obviously, it's like all these examples are imperfect. So savages, for example, already have speech and all kind of thing, but still, this is Rousseau's best attempt. So, and children, savages, and animals. And again, it's kind of interesting. I want to pause here for one moment because, well, first of all, it's a whole separate discussion, which there's absolutely no time to go into. But if you actually read modern textbooks of demography, Rousseau, in a very important respect, he's right. For the vast majority of people, as a percentage of the population, life was much better when human beings were hunter-gatherers than after the agricultural transition. Like, even take a simple objective measure. If you look at bones of ancient hunter-gatherers, we know that they were taller, they ate better, they were healthier, they were stronger, they lived longer than people after the transition to agriculture. So, and again, yeah. Well, and again, this is a different course. This is not a course in demography, but the reasons are simple. Because when you transition to agriculture, you stay in one place and you eat just one particular type of food. And this means that first of all you get all sorts of vitamin deficiencies, but also because you stay in one place, you get endemic diseases. Endemic diseases such as, for example, smallpox or measles, osprey, koi. And up until the 19th century, upwards of two-thirds of children upwards, died of various endemic infectious diseases before reaching the age of reproduction. So life was really bad. And it's like, you could ask, why does this happen? And the answer is because agriculture is more efficient per square kilometer. So you can support a larger population on a smaller territory. And this means that basically you're going to win any war. So agriculturals, even though individually they are weaker and much more miserable than hunter-gatherers, still as a group they're much stronger. Because up until the invention of the machine gun, and the first use of the machine gun in the Battle of Omdurman, if you want, you can look this up. Always, if you have overwhelming odds on your side, you always win. It's like the Battle of Omdurman is the first time when, being outnumbered something 100 to 1, you can still win. So it is a very unfortunate, but you can see this kind of maybe like a failed prisoner's dilemma game. Not necessarily failed prisoner's dilemma game, but something structurally happening. Something that forces you to engage in agriculture. Because again, Rousseau says this, and again, this seems to be a very, very what's the right phrase? Sensible argument, a deeply sensible argument. He says, yeah, okay, hunter-gatherers know some basics of agriculture, but why would you engage in agriculture? Agriculture is toil. It's a lot of work, and the fruits of agriculture only come much later down the line. If you can just walk around the forest and gather all you need, you will never engage in agriculture. So you have to be forced to engage in agriculture by external circumstances. What kind of circumstances? Population increases, and there's not enough food to go around. And if you just walk around the forest, there isn't enough for you to feed yourself, and you will die of starvation. So it's either die or engage in agriculture. Yeah. So, yeah. And again, Rousseau also mentions this, that when hunters bring game from the forests, deer, or foxes, or lions, or whatever, bears, they're healthy. And it's true. I mean, even if you look at sorry states of stray cats in Moscow, they're mostly healthy. But compared to the kind of misery that human civilized society can sustain, there is no comparison to the kind of misery that human civilized society can sustain. So again. So imagine some kind of horrible condition of slavery. Yeah, Belgian Congo, for example, or American, plantations of the South. So you have these, malnourished, constantly whipped slaves who are constantly in a miserable condition. You will not find wild animals in such conditions. And again, the bottom line is this: if an animal becomes sick, it probably dies. So it's like even if you suffer, you either heal fast or die fast. But you don't get these chunks of life, like in society. And you see, again, Stephen Smith talks about Rousseau as a forerunner of Freud, and Rousseau is a forerunner of Freud in the sense how civilization makes us miserable. Like we acquire this capacity to suffer misery, to live in a horrible state of horrible depression and anxiety, not for 5 minutes, not for 1 hour, but for 20 years or maybe 50 years. And this is like something unique that happens in society. And again, I think Rousseau's basic point is valid, including if you look at at demographic evidence. I mean, just to be completely pedantic, of course, if you look at his ideas of how human society evolved, especially these ideas of language, yeah, Rousseau is not exactly correct on every point. So modern anthropology and modern demography have some corrections to make to Rousseau, but still, his account is by and large correct as far as we can tell. Anyway, so what do we have in the state of nature? So we have these three or four characteristics. This amour de soi and perfectibility. So I suppose these are the two most important ones. So we have amour de soi. Again, the reason we use French is because amour de soi and amour propre both translate into English as love of self. So it's best to get acquainted. So amour de soi, which is your basic desire for self-preservation, and the second one is this perfectibility, which is perfectibilité in French. Amour de soi is linked. Is that okay if I say it's linked to pity? Yeah. So amour de soi is linked to pity. Again, in French, pitié, but pity is fine. In the sense that there's natural compassion. Maybe I should even write this. Natural compassion. And again, Rousseau is going to agree with Hobbes that in the evil contract, we do not have natural compassion. But that's because our nature has been broken. Like, originally we have natural compassion. And again, like, I'm not sure if I should keep trying to defend Rousseau on every point, but yeah, I think he's right. Because, again, this wonderful example. If I stand in front of all of you here, and if I take a butcher's knife and I carve myself open in front of yourself, with blood and other organs splashing all around, most of you, not all admittedly, but most of you will be deeply distressed. Anyway.
So amour de soi is the same as natural compassion.
No, amour de soi is love of self, so immediately it is a drive to self-preservation. But again, self-preservation in terms of it is our desire to feel good. Rousseau is going to insist, and he points this out several places in the Discourse on the Origin of Inequality. He says that animals and children do not have the idea of death. They do not know that they will die. And that's why, again, amour de soi is not the fear of death. It's just a desire to satisfy your needs. Now, why is this important? Some of you, insightful among you, will see an important contrast with Hobbes. Because for Hobbes, if I know that I will die, and if I'm afraid that I will die, I have this anxiety to take care of the future. Basically, because I'm afraid I'm going to die, and I know that maybe I'll die of starvation, I see all of you, and I see future competitors for my survival. So it is in my weird interest to kill all of you, to make sure that we are not in competition for scarce goods in the future. And Rousseau says, this only happens after the invention of language, after the invention of conceptual thought, that primitive humans are not afraid of death. And because they're not afraid of death, they are not planning for the future. And because they're not planning for the future, this is one less cause for war. Because you are not planning for the future, this is less reason to go to war.
But then compassion is something derived from amour de soi, right?
I feel the answer is yes. Because the way Rousseau phrases this, if I'm not mistaken, in the discourse, is he says, I want to feel good, and because I want to feel good, I naturally recognize the same desire in you. Okay, so So perfectibility is, if you want, this, the bottom line is that perfectibility is a sign of our underdetermination. Underdetermination. If you want underdetermination by instinct, so different philosophers will find different essential characteristics of human beings, like what is the difference between humans and animals. For Rousseau, it is the fact that we are underdetermined by instinct. That animal behavior is basically pre-programmed. He says this, echoing Hobbes. Rousseau says, I see in an animal nothing but an ingenious machine. So he says that animals are like mechanical clocks, if you want, because they're pre-programmed by instinct. But human beings are different. Human beings are underdetermined by instinct, and this gives us a capacity to change. Capacity to change, including a capacity to change our nature. Who asked me about Gattungswesen on Saturday? Somebody asked me about Gattungswesen. This is as close as you get to Gattungswesen in other philosophers. Gattungswesen is a species being in Marx. This notion that human beings are uniquely underdetermined, that human beings have this capacity to change. Again, I have a cat. I actually have two cats and a dog, and the life of my cat, of both of my cats, is not particularly different from the life of cats 2,000 years ago, or 10,000 years, or 100,000 years ago. But my life is very different from the life of a human being 100,000 years ago, because we have this capacity to change. You can call it culture, but Rousseau, just in the negative sense, is a capacity to change and to acquire all sorts of things, to acquire language, for example. So culture, if you want, is a result of this. Through this capacity to change, we can acquire language, and through language, we acquire culture, and culture allows us to change. Maybe just for fun, maybe I should write this on the board. So, language, culture. Now, okay, people, just to make sure that we're on the same page. Capacity to change for the better, for the worse, neutral. For the worse. Mostly for the worse.
But for the better as well, if we after we have
The downward line is surefire. Everybody changes for the worse. But the line up is dotted. It's a very rare possibility. And again, if I were to give you an example of a bad society, that's very simple. Any society you point to is bad for Rousseau. But the good societies are very rare. Again, there's Rome. Only in the Republican period, Republican Rome, before Caesar, basically. So there's Republican Rome. There's Sparta. Sparta before the Peloponnesian War, I would imagine, or at least before the end of the Peloponnesian War. And kind of that's it. I mean, there are a couple other examples that you can think of. I mean, at some point, Rousseau talks about what was it? What's the name of the place? Starts with a C. Okay. I don't remember. Okay, it's one of them. Don't listen. It's either Crete or Corinth or Carthage, but I don't remember. I'm not sure. Anyway, so there are a couple of examples. So he will talk about ancient Persia. Well, when he talks about ancient Persia, I mean, is it really true? Well, he's talking about the writings of Xenophon, and Xenophon paints a very interesting picture of ancient Persians, which probably has absolutely no basis in reality. But in the works of Xenophon, yeah, ancient Persia in certain aspects as well. Especially there's this very famous story from Xenophon of the social contract among the ancient Persians when they elect Cyrus to be their king.
Yeah, it's Crete.
Crete. Okay, excellent. So maybe Crete is also one example. So, but these examples are like extremely rare. I gave you, okay, and Calvin's Geneva, and that's more or less it. Now, there's immediately a very important question: what to do if again? It's like if you are not born in a well-constituted regime, you cannot be Cato. You cannot be Cato. You cannot be a Cato, right? And not everybody will be able to be a Socrates. So what do you do? What do you do? And this is why. Okay, let me say, because I'm a fan of giving answers straight away. Read in Klosko his discussion of the Constitution of Poland. Because Rousseau is, to some extent, has this conservative streak in him. he understands, when he writes about the Constitution of Poland, I mean, he actually wrote a draft of the Constitution for Poland at the request of the Polish nobility. And what Rousseau says is, okay, your country's bad, but we need to try to make it better without making it worse. And that's a very difficult thing. And Rousseau basically says that the task of real politics, like if you're not like Kyrgyz or Moses, for most legislators in most times, is how to make better of a bad situation. How to make good of a bad situation. And one thing that he says is the first task is to avoid revolution. He says, whatever you do, we have to avoid revolution because revolution is going to make things much worse. And he talks about like very careful and cautious reforms. So much so that Klosko actually says, because again, Rousseau is supposed to be this horrible, dictatorial, revolutionary thinker. Well, actually, if you read the Constitution of Poland, Klosko says if one wants to accuse Rousseau of something when he writes the Constitution of Poland, it is of too much conservatism and not too much reformism. Like he's too cautious, he's too careful. And this is influence of Montesquieu. Montesquieu had this notion that every people have a certain spirit, if you want culture. And this spirit changes only gradually. You cannot make rapid transitions. If you make a rapid change, things break down immediately. So as a matter of reality, yes, there is a possibility of political founding. So where should I draw this on the board? So political founding is, you make a nation out of new people like that from scratch. It seems that this would be like a radical break. But for most times in most places, the only thing you can hope for is like gradual, slow reform. So let me put it like this. Maybe slowly moving up to 0.0. And let me write the word Poland here so that we remember. This is the Constitution of Poland. Okay. Talking about everything at the same time, but that's okay because you already had the basic notion. So, let's talk about the fall. Let's talk about the fall. Okay. So the fall.
Sorry, sir. What is red in those?
Red, Poland. Constitution of Poland. It's like maybe a fourth alternative. You can be a savage, you can be a citizen, you can be a bourgeois, language and culture. Okay. So when we talk about the fall, those of you who read Klosko says the first step is unclear. We do not know what the first step is. Klosko says maybe the climate changes, maybe there's a volcano or some kind of earthquake. Who knows? But at the same, Rousseau. So let me write. How do you talk about climate and volcanoes like environmental factors, like changing environment, with a question mark? Maybe the environment changes. But at the same time, regardless of whether the environment changes or not, there's population growth. And one reason for the population growth is those of you who started reading Second Discourse, do you remember? He says that I see in a human animal, he says he's not as fast, not as strong, but he has the best combination. He's a master of no trade, but jack of all trades. And this lack of instinct, but being a little bit good at everything, gives human beings competitive advantage. So it seems that population just grows naturally. So people get together.
It's still 0, right?
Yeah, it's still 0. People get together and begin living in families and tribes. And then you have 3 things which I would imagine happen simultaneously. Or at least in no particular order. Okay? 1, 2, 3 happen in no particular order. So the first one is Amour propre. This counterpart to Amour de soi. Sometimes related as vanity or vainglory. Glory seeking. Let me say this just fun. Sargon of Akkad translates this as narcissism. So, not necessarily the worst translation. The second one is corn and iron. Again, why in no particular order? Because Rousseau imagines that hunting, well, when I say corn, I mean agriculture and metallurgy, of course. Agriculture and metallurgy. And again, English word for corn, before the discovery of the Americas, just meant any kind of grain. So wheat is also corn in English. Okay, corn is not kukuruza, corn is zirno. Okay? So he says hunter-gatherers might have already known about corn, and hunter-gatherers might have already discovered iron. Who knows how? He says maybe they saw a volcanic eruption and tried to imitate that. But Rousseau says this is a very interesting problem. How did human beings first discover metallurgy? And the third one is property. Well, okay, I said in no particular order, but that's probably wrong because to have property you need to have.
You need to first have for.
Okay, then probably in this order.
Yeah. And what is amour propre?
Yeah, more proper. Okay, if this is a desire to feel good, this is a desire to be glorified, be honored above others. Again, as Epicurus puts it, the desire to have bronze statues erected in your honor. Well, anyway, again, it's a desire that other people esteem you above themselves, that people respect you above themselves. That you are, okay, maybe let me just write this. The desire to be number one. And notice, feel good is this, it's a non-conflictual, it's a satiable desire. It can be satiated. You know, I feel pretty good now, and maybe you feel good, and that's okay. You know, your feeling good does not detract me from my feeling good. But if we ask, who is the most illustrious person in this room? See, there's only one spot for number one. So if you are most illustrious, then I am not the most illustrious. And this is a cause for conflict. Something like that. And this can be satiated. So it is. Let me write this. It's not necessarily conflictual. So it's not essentially conflictual. Amour de soi. And also, it is satisfiable, right? It is, if you want limited. Let me write satisfiable. Whereas, amour propre is conflictual, and it is also insatiable. Because again, you see, how much money do I need to buy myself, let's say, a piece of clothing or lunch or something, or a pair of boots or a pair of shoes, right? That will satisfy my needs. So it's a limited amount. It is a limited amount. Again, from each, Louis Blanc, from each according to his ability, to each according to his needs. This is what Louis Blanc is talking about. Everybody can be clothed, fed, etc., etc. And immediately, economics students say, but what if my need is a Lamborghini? Lamborghini is not a need. In the sense that, I mean, when we talk about this in terms of in Marxist context, we say that maybe transportation is a need, but Lamborghini does not sound like a need. Whereas if you talk about amour propre, right? So if I have this burning desire to be esteemed above everybody else, if I want a pair of shoes such that everybody in the room will drop their pants, how much can this pair of shoes cost? And the answer is unlimited amount. There is no cap. And again, like if I told you that last week somebody bought a hamburger which cost $1 million, would you be surprised? No. So these, I mean, in a sense that like maybe you would be shocked or disgusted, but these things happen, and we know that they happen. So in this sense, you have this conflictual desire. And notice. So we have population growth, and at the same time amour propre, and these things together. So population plus amour propre lead to scarcity. This plus this lead to scarcity. And maybe, in some sense, this is the most important issue. That scarcity is the root of all our problems. People become violent, people become heartless because of scarcity. And We need to talk about inequality, by the way, at some point, because the whole book is the discourse on the origin of inequality. Yeah. So, I'm not sure how many details I should go into, and maybe we'll return back to this, especially when we read the text. Well, let me finish with a story. And then I'll comment. So again, then, at number 4, we have the consequences. Number 4 is the war of all against all. Let me just write war. Basically because of scarcity. It's the war.
How Rousseau writes it?
No, this is how Hobbes writes this. Yeah. This is how Hobbes writes this in the early editions of, like, this is how it used to be written in Shakespeare's time. So then, at number 5, you have the evil contract. And evil contract is a swindle. It is a machination. It is a lie. How do you say this in Russian? Обман, не обмана, мошенничество. What's it like? Swindler. Okay, which word do you prefer in English? Do you understand the word swindle? No. Fraud. Okay. Excellent. You all know the word fraud, right? Fraud. It is a fraud perpetrated by the rich against the poor. And lastly, to top all this off, to make things even worse, we're talking about international relations and especially genocide. How genocide becomes glorious. Rousseau talks about the honor of shedding human blood. And this is the story of the fall. Well, again, in terms of the true social contract, Rousseau is also going to ask this question. I mean, this is a digression, but whatever. I mean, let's talk about this now. Why not? So, if you have true social contracts, right? How do you treat international relations? It says if you become too big, right, you can no longer have a true social contract. We need to list the conditions of the true social contract. I'm not sure. Maybe we should do this right now because this is really important. In Rousseau somewhere. Maybe write this here, and maybe even write this in red. So how many conditions do we have? 3, 4. So you have to be small. You have to be homogeneous. Homogeneous in the sense that there's a common interest. And homogeneous also means that you should have either no factions or too many factions. And for the same reason, you should have no extremes of wealth or poverty. So you should all be approximately middle class. Again, Rousseau says this is that nobody should be so poor that he has to sell himself, and nobody should be so rich as to be able to buy others. Again, if you imagine democracy.
Is this policy or it's
this is this is from the study guide. I haven't seen these conditions laid out quite like that in Rousseau.
Self-sufficiency, because what we had from the first lectures was you had relative equality.
Number 5 is like number 5 is like international self-sufficiency, and this would be like international autonomy. How should I write this? So in the realm of IR, you should be autonomous, self-sufficient. So and these are the conditions for the true social contract, which are very rare. And again, so Jean-Jacques Rousseau is not Jean-Jacques Stalin, because he understands that the picture he paints is idealized and will obtain only in very few places. He says, upon close examination, it will be found that most countries do not have laws, and like lawless tyrannies where people are ruled by this direct slavery under the force of war, almost. So, if you are true social contracts, what do you do in terms of international relations? Again, political realism, right? If we are small states, we cannot protect ourselves from large empires. How can we protect ourselves without compromising our security? And Rousseau's answer is, can you guess? This is what you're going to talk about next year. Confederations. Confederations. So he says, if you want to preserve civic liberty and at the same time be able to defend yourself, you need confederations of small states. Leagues of states. Daniel said that for every philosopher, international relations are bad. Well, not exactly for Rousseau, because there is a way to solve the problem of international relations through confederations.
So self-sufficiency is if they can be ruled by something.
Yeah, self-sufficiency in the sense that, let's imagine, I do not have enough food, I have to import my food from abroad, and this means that people who sell food to me can, influence my domestic policy.
So I have to make... Я поняла, это как одно из
Are we talking about economic self-sufficiency? Yeah, so this is economic self-sufficiency. Economic self-sufficiency. And also Rousseau, for the same reason, wants to limit international trade, or at least limit reliance on international trade. Partly because, again, international trade, if you have people who make wealth off of international trade, you cannot necessarily trust them to be patriotic. Maybe they'll have their own interests above the interests of society. Maybe they will have an interest in importing goods and selling them at much higher prices, or these kinds of things. Hobbes actually talks about this at some point, about monopolies and monopsonies, and how there's good laws and just laws, and there are good laws pertaining to economic arrangement of international trade. How can you arrange international trade for the benefit of the country and not for the benefit of the merchants? Arrange trade for the benefit of the country and not for the benefit of the merchants, who are like half external agents. Okay, so I don't know, in no particular order. Let me just say this now, because otherwise I'll forget. What is the main point of the book? Again, it's called The Discourse on the Foundation and Origin of Inequality Among Men. Rousseau basically says that in the state of nature, we are equal, almost completely equal. We're almost completely equal in the state of nature. So all inequality which exists today is artificial. He starts his work with a very interesting phrase. He says that, and I've talked to students like that, who tell me, well, the order that I see outside the window is just. Yeah? Some people graduate from Harvard. That's why they earn approximately 1 billion times more than people who live in Africa. That's fair. They work more. They have more talent. And Rousseau says, these are arguments of slaves. Like if you believe that people who rule because they deserve to rule, thank you very much, you're a slave at heart. So Rousseau basically says that, again, naturally speaking, some people are stronger, some people are weaker, some people are sharper in terms of their wit, some people are not so sharp. But in general, naturally speaking, we are all almost exactly equal compared to the inequality which is introduced by society. So he talks about this. Yeah, he says about a midget and a giant. Well, it doesn't matter. But I mean, again, it's like take the smartest possible person and put them in hunter-gatherer society, or take a person of mediocre intelligence and put them in Harvard, and the person of mediocre intelligence will achieve much more in Harvard, because it's again, nature and nurture. All of this is mostly due to nurture. Inequality is mostly due to society. And Rousseau is going to say that this inequality, what is the problem with this inequality? The problem is that I'm not sure if I can phrase this in a concise fashion, but this inequality is arbitrary. Mm-hmm. So people who rule not because they deserve to rule, but just because they manage through force to capture the ruling positions, and now they want to maintain them through force and fraud. And as they are trying to perpetuate their usurpation, they ruin everything. They ruin their own lives, and they ruin the lives of society. And he's adamant. He says that people who think themselves masters of others are actually more slaves than they. So if you are trying to rule over others, you will have to serve this God of your vainglory. You will ruin your life, and you will spend all your life trying to dominate over others, trying to constantly, avoid insurrections, etc., etc. Your life will not be happy. Your life will not be happy if you try to dominate over others. And basically, like in the social contract, you see, inequality per se is not a problem. In the social contract, that's excellent. It's a wonderful example from Plutarch, I think. There was a Spartan citizen who wanted to become the member of the Council of 300. and he was not selected. He comes home. Is he sulking? No, he says, yes, I am so happy for my country that there are 300 people who are more qualified than me to serve on the council. And then for Rousseau, this is what he means by virtue. This is what he means by patriotism. So this notion that inequality is not a problem. It just has to be the inequality of the right kind. If the best people get to serve on your council, this is in the interest of all. Like again, when you go to a doctor, you don't want to go to the equal doctor. You want to go to the best doctor. Likewise, when you have the council, political assembly, or when you appoint generals, or even when you appoint a mayor of a city, you want that person to be the best person you can find for the job. But there are differences. There are differences between, if you want, functional inequalities and dysfunctional inequalities. So, like in the true social contract, there are true inequalities which increase the welfare of everybody. When you get best people in best positions. And in the evil contract, we have these dysfunctional inequalities, where mediocre people are trying to illegitimately hold on to their offices. And again, because they have no natural title to rule, because it is impossible for them to prove that they can rule by any means, they have to use it through force and fraud, and this ruins the society. This is in a nutshell, this is the summary of the discourse on the origin of inequality in Rousseau. Yeah. Well, I want to talk about virtue, but
it's a question. You just said that the best people are not ruling in the evil context, so they ruin society. Do they ruin it because they are incapable, or because they are so power hungry that what they want is power? Blah 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 blah.
Well, it's like if you want, in the evil contract, people rule not by nature but against nature. There's simply a bunch of people who, without any title, usurp the power, and they use this power not for the common benefit, but for the benefit of themselves. And it's the truth, Rousseau thinks. And because it's the truth, people can more or less see that it's the truth. So people who are in power need to protect their position by lying to the population and also by using force. And in doing so, and this is the only way that they can keep their power, and in doing so, in using force and fraud, they ruin the society. Again, in the true social contract, the idea is that people who rule because they're the best. We know that they're the best, and we objectively see that their rule is in the interest of all. And that's why nobody objects, and you do not need force, and you do not need fraud, and this is all harmonious and wonderful. Again, Rousseau says that on par, like in general, probably the best regime is elective aristocracy. And elective aristocracy is about inequality. You have people who are better, and they're being elected by the population. And the process of election makes sure that you elect the best people. Because ariston in Greek means the best, aristocracy, right? You elect the best people, and not just the wealthiest, or the ones who are most power hungry or the most ambitious, but actually the best who are best in terms of the common interest. And again, this is a very important presupposition of Rousseau's whole project, that there is objectively a common interest. If you do not have objectively a common interest in your society, then society is impossible. He says the difference of interest makes society necessary, the commonality of interest makes society possible. If you live in a society where there is no common interest, you cannot have a true social contract at all. Let me say one word about virtue. So again, virtue is this complicated Greek word. In Greek, the word is arete, which means excellence, and or in Latin, again, we're talking about vir, root vir, which means man or manliness, mужество if you want. So it is a word which is difficult. I mean, how do you even translate this into Russian? I have no idea. Добродетель, but that sounds weird, and it doesn't have the patriotic connotations that Rousseau uses. So basically, what Rousseau is talking about, in some sense, virtue for him is, in a certain sense, a synonym for the word patriotism. Now, let me. I need to let you go on a break, but let me finish with this. Patriotism, yeah. The idea is, again, in the evil contract. So again, selfishness and altruism. In the evil contract, there's a genuine conflict between people. It's a conflict, remember conflict consensus? I keep talking from time to time. So if you are a patriot of the evil contract, you just shoot yourself in the foot. You are just allowing yourself to be taken advantage of by the usurpers and by the tyrants. So patriotism is not necessarily a good thing, but in the true social contract, the whole idea is that the true social contract is based objectively on the alignment of individual and community interests. So it's like, if I have to serve in the army, in the true social contract, okay, I maybe, selfishly I want to say, well, I don't want to serve in the army, it's dangerous, it's risky. But if everybody thinks that way, our true social contract collapses and we go back to being the slaves. So it is actually in my interest that everybody is made to serve in the army, which is what Rousseau calls force to be free. And again, remember, force to be free is not force. It's different. Forcing and forcing to be free are different things. But again, so what am I talking about this? I'm talking about is that this virtue and patriotism, this is not altruism and self-sacrifice. This is not self-sacrifice. Not self-sacrifice. No, it is the alignment of your individual with the interest of the whole. The interest of the individual with the interest of the whole. And yes, maybe you will need to make short-term limited sacrifices like serving in the army for the sake of the long-term rational self-interest, that we are protected from the outside force. Again, the example that Klosko gives, you remember, is a simple example, like the area is being flooded and we need to dig ditches. But let's suppose I live on a hill and I'm not affected by flooding. Still, Rousseau says, if I want to keep enjoying the benefits of the community, I need to pay my fair share. And again, the idea of patriotism for Rousseau is that in the true social contract, the motherland or the country gives to you much more than it asks from you in return. So the country gives you much more than you give back to the country. So it's always a free gift. So it's always a good idea. Well, again, in the true social contract, well, I don't want to say always a good idea, but most of the time, this is the way arrangement works. In extreme circumstances, if the country forces you to sacrifice your life for it, then what can you do? Because you have this option. Do you want to risk your life in battle and die fighting for your freedom, or do you want to live as a slave? And for Rousseau, the answer is clear: it's die fighting and not live as a slave. Okay, apologies, I stole 5 minutes of your time. Okay, people. Well, anybody wants to ask quick questions? Okay. So let's take a break and we'll continue after the break. I hope this is more or less clear and more or less fun. Anyway, so questions. Did you get far in close call?
How does social contract become more? I mean, if people do not fear that.
Well, I feel that in some sense the short answer is the true social contract, like as how does it become void? Well, it depends on what you mean, I suppose. I mean, like how does it die? Well, I mean, on the one hand, Rousseau imagines that you can have this gradual process of corruption. By which people, so you have this general will, which is this, if you want this ideal device, this idealized model. And the general will kind of entails that everybody does what they're supposed to. But you could imagine how, every time somebody lies and gets away with it, every time there's an unjust sentence passed down by the courts and people get away with it. So every time gradually, point by point, people lose their faith, if you want, in the social contract. And so it's like I mean, again, Klosko gives this interesting example from Dostoevsky. From notes from the underground. I haven't read it, so some of you might have read it, and so you could tell me. So how there's this incident where the protagonist stumbles into a policeman, and the policeman is extremely disrespectful, and like he acquires this deep hatred for the policeman. Does this ring a bell? Anybody read Dostoevsky, Notes from the Underground? Whatever. So anyway, so you imagine these small grievances, these small problems accumulating, up until when you need to do something, when you need to do the right thing, you're saying, well, what has society done for me lately? I don't feel at home in this society, and people start like really violating the common trust, and so gradually the morals decay in such a fashion. And basically, the true social contract turns into an evil contract. Or could you imagine a revolution or being conquered by outside forces? Yeah, as well. Those kinds of things as well. So.
And then he's turned in evil contract. Can it go further, or is it like the final stage? I don't know how to explain. I mean, we cannot go back to this human nature. If the true social contract is void, then we go back to the evil contract. So evil contract is like.
Well, I mean, okay, so Rousseau never uses this phrase, but conceptually speaking, you have to understand that Hobbes' state of nature exists here. Like this black line. Once we have crossed this black line, we are basically in Hobbes' state of nature. So it's like same rules apply. Your true social contract can degenerate into an evil contract, or your society may collapse, and you just go back to this war of all against all. Something like that.
But it is not the same as state of nature.
He doesn't use this phrase, state of nature. So we have to be careful. Okay, so I suppose let's continue. So we should spend the bulk of the second class talking about the social contract. So again, in no particular order, let's start sort of at the most important junction. So should I leave this on the board? I wonder. I don't know.
Yes, please. We'll take a picture.
Well, I've taken a picture. I've taken a picture. Don't worry. So I'm just thinking whether I need this scheme or not. Well, I mean, I can always redraw it if I need to. So anyway. So the true social contract begins with these words that, again, the task of the true social contract is to find a form of association which will defend and protect each member of the community with the full common force, which will defend and protect the person and the goods, the person and the property of each member of the community with the full common force. And then he continues, and through this association, each unites with all, yet remains as free as before. Each uniting with all remains as free as before. There's a wonderful catchphrase in Rousseau, maybe I should repeat it. He says, we obey laws so as to not obey men. We obey laws so as to not obey men. Or as he puts this elsewhere, I have a prince so as to not have a master. I have a prince so as to not have a master. And by prince he means this magistrate appointed by the general will. Anyway, so I'm tempted to start at point zero, because the point zero is clear. In an oversimplified fashion, and this will be familiar to you. See, if men are as Hobbes describes them, can you have the true social contract? And the answer seems to be no. So this story of degeneration seems to leave us at a stage where we cannot really make the true social contract. So what you need, point number zero, is you need to change human nature. And this is done through this lawgiver or legislator. So, lawgiver is a problem.
It's the first step of transition from evil contract to true social contract.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if a lawgiver finds a group of savages, maybe he can also transmit them to the true social contract, although if they don't have language, how is this going to work? I don't know.
So we agree that there is a transition period? Or no?
Well, there is a transition. Like, transition takes place in stages. This is not how, like in Hobbes, where you either in security or not. Here you have this, although Rousseau doesn't really explain how this happens, so it's kind of, it's not really a solution to Hobbes' problem, but he just envisions this differently. Anyway, so the lawgiver is a problem because the lawgiver is a miracle. And Rousseau basically says, because the lawgiver is a miracle, you cannot really explain it, you cannot predict it, you cannot conjure a lawgiver into existence, right? So, but Rousseau says, I know that these things happen. I know that there was Lycurgus, there was Numa, one of the kings of Rome, there's Lycurgus, there's Moses, and at one point he seems to also say even Mohammed. So he says, and himself, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, obviously. So, well, he doesn't say it, but it's clear. I mean, he did legislate for Corsica and Poland, so he probably thought that he was up to the task. So basically, it's like, these people are miraculous. We do not know how they come about, but we know that they exist. Mm-hmm. And basically what the lawgiver does is, and I'm not sure if I should read you the quote, it's a pretty long quote, but he says that the lawgiver should be free from all human passions, but at the same time know human passions. He should not care about his own selfish desires and work for the sake of benefits which will accrue, which will come about hundreds of years after he dies. So basically you have to have this superhuman figure who is already a true citizen, somehow, by the strength of his own mind, is already a true citizen, and who is able to reshape the people according to true citizenship, to sort of, again, if you want, this is a solution to Hobbes's fool's problem. That, naturally speaking, from within this bourgeois situation, there is no solution to the free rider problem. In fact, Ekaterina asked me, how does this social contract degenerate? And this is exactly what I gave to you, the answer. That over time, these small fool's problems, which people can get away with, accumulate up until the point that your society either breaks down or degenerates into this evil contract. So, the only way we can stop this from happening is if you change human motivation. If human beings are genuinely motivated to basically pursue patriotism, and it's a problem. It's a first mover problem. It's a bootstrap problem, because once people are patriotic, it's in their interest. It's actually in their interest, but they need to be committed to that. It's like, okay, the analogy that Costco uses on every page is alcoholism. It's like you have to force the alcoholic through a certain period of abstinence, and then the alcoholic will see that this life is better for him. But at first you need this nudge, you need this jolt, without which sort of the alcohol is just down towards the path of self-destruction. So I suppose the most important thing is this patriotism. But again, patriotism is not self-sacrifice. Patriotism is not self-sacrifice for Rousseau. It's important to keep in mind. And then another very important thing is that the lawgiver does not have political power. The lawgiver has no political power. So he can only use some kind of
So if he goes and speaks.
non-political, charismatic authority. And Rousseau says probably this is going to be done through religion. But he says the soul of the lawgiver has to be the proof. Because again, you see, it's like for Hobbes and for Machiavelli and for Rousseau, religion, it's not a matter of truth. We're not talking about whether religion is true or not. It's kind of this type of reasoning is not in the cards. Sort of after the 30 Years' War, people know that you cannot settle religious questions through rational discourse. Like mathematical problem, a question: can you square the circle? You can settle that objectively. I mean, Hobbes proposed to the nascent Royal Academy in Britain that he could square the circle, and people were able to point, to problems in his demonstration. And this was actually one of the most shameful moments in Hobbes' life, when he was disgraced in front of the highest intellectuals of England at the time, when he tried to square the circle. You understand this is an old problem. Ancient problem using a straight edge and a compass. С помощью циркуля и линейки построить квадратуру круга. You might have heard about this. Anyway, doesn't matter. Construct a square with the same surface area as a given circle. I give you a circle, give me a square with the same surface area. Ooh, yeah. This, by the way, this has been proven in the 19th century to be impossible because pi is a transcendental number. P, cannot be constructed as a fraction of ratios And so that's the solution. Who proved this? What, Gauss, I think? I forget. Doesn't matter. It's Gauss or Euler, I forget. Doesn't matter. Anyway. So, I digress. I horribly digress. I was talking about Rousseau. Let's go back to Rousseau. So, questions of religion are not questions of truth. But this is, if you want, this is what Carl Schmitt calls political theology. And this is actually what German thinkers, this is something that none of your home assignments talk about. So it's kind of half illegal for me to talk about this. But there's a sociological reading. There's a sociological reading of both Rousseau and, very importantly, Hobbes. Because you can see Hobbesian project as, in some sense, how is society possible at all? And okay, you don't agree with his solutions about absolute monarchy, etc., but it seems, sociologically speaking, in terms of people like Durkheim, like at the basis of society, there's a certain basic deference. Like we defer to the society, we honor the society above ourselves on some deep level. This is the reading of Hobbes, and the same can be said about Rousseau. That in some, and again, this is actually what Durkheim says, that solidarity on some level is society worshipping itself. Durkheim has this important book. It's called The Elementary Forms of Religious Life, and he wants to say that religion, a certain element of religion, is basic to every kind of community. Like people should see violation of social norms as religious taboo. It doesn't mean that you believe in God. Any kind of society, even atheistic society, to the extent that they work, need to have this quasi-religious element, where people take laws not just as prudent maxims, not just as convenient articles of peace, but as Taylor Warner says, as real laws which are binding, obligatory. And this is sort of how you get out of the fool's problem for Rousseau and for contemporary sociology, if you want. Again, Durkheim calls this non-contractual elements of contract. Again, Durkheim is aware of the fool's problem. He has his own solution. Anyway, which is roughly speaking called solidarity, that we have a passion in our souls. We want to keep the laws, even if there's no good coming from it to us. We enjoy keeping the law just for the sake of keeping the law. Enjoy is a strange word, but we're motivated to keep the law just for the sake of keeping the law. Anyway, so again, when we talk about this religion, we aren't talking about any particular, and we're not talking about religious truth. Although Rousseau, I mean, his views on religions are very eccentric, and we need to talk about this sometime until until the class runs out. Well, actually, let me signal this immediately. An important point. Every one of you will have to write about this on the exam. If this question arises, civic religion. Let me say this immediately. So again, in ancient times, the lawgivers could just impose one religion on the populace. But now, again, history is real. History plays a role in Rousseau. History is important, and history cannot be reversed. And the trouble is, Rousseau says, in contemporary world, basically after the Protestant Reformation, after the 30 Years' War, you cannot decide on what is the right religion. It's impossible. It's not in the cards. You're not going to get consensus. So his civic religion is, if you want, again, some form of civic worship of society, like certain civic rituals in which people pay homage to the state. Which some people find very ominous, but Rousseau says this is the only possible basis of real functioning society, and this is the only, if you want, possible solution to the fool's problem. And he says one of the precepts of this religion, one of the key precepts, is going to be prohibition on intolerance. So we tolerate all religions, like in Hegel, we're going to see this later. We tolerate all religions which are compatible with our laws. We tolerate all religions which are compatible with our laws, and the only religions which we do not tolerate are the ones that do not tolerate others. And so what is the content of this religion? He says its precepts should be short and simple. That there's some kind of omnipotent deity. So some kind of let's put it this way. First of all, there's an objective moral law, and this objective moral law is enforced by somebody or something. It can be a god or a group of gods or some kind of cosmic intelligence or law of karma.
What is it again? Where does it refer to?
Objective moral law. Well, basically, that laws of your society are sacred. That breaking the laws of society is a violation.
It's a part of civic religion.
Yes. There's a separate chapter on the social contract about civic religion. And Rousseau says, of course, it is impossible to make a person believe. And Rousseau and Hobbes agree on this. You see? Certain things are impossible. Again, think back to Thomas Hobbes. Threaten me with death, threaten me with torture, and tell me, look at this marker and see, not a marker, but an elephant. Not imagine, but see. Or see, not a marker, but I don't know, a Sturmgewehr or a Sherman Firefly. Or look outside the window and believe that it is raining. Sort of, again, threaten me with torture. Skin my pets in front of my face. I cannot do it. It is physically impossible. So, for this reason, both Rousseau and Hobbes agree that even though the sovereign has unlimited authority, for both Hobbes and Rousseau, sovereign has unlimited authority, certain things simply cannot be done. So Rousseau says you cannot force people to believe the civic religion, but you can force them to observe it. You can force them to respect it in outward signs. Yeah. So if I can find, it's a bit of a waste of time, but if I can find the quote. Yeah. So this is paragraph 33. Again, I highly recommend the Gurevich translation to you in the Cambridge edition. Okay, look it up. I hope everybody can find it. So this is chapter 8 of civil religion. Okay, I wrote civic religion. He translated it as civil religion. It's the same thing. Of civil religion. So this is paragraph 33. He says the dogmas of civil religion have to be simple, few in number, and stated with precision, without explanation or commentaries. Which means that every religion will be able to fill in their own details. First, the existence of a powerful, intelligent, beneficent, and powerful, intelligent, beneficent meaning good, well-meaning, benevolent. How do you say this in Russian? Любящий? Something like that. Beneficent, prescient, so all-knowing, and provident divinity. This is number one. Number two, the life to come, afterlife. Why do we need the afterlife? Because again, this is a solution to the fool's problem. You got away with your transgressions in this life, maybe, but in the next life you'll be punished. Second one, life to come. The third one, happiness of the just and punishment of the wicked. The good people will be rewarded and bad people will be punished. And the last one, the sanctity of the social contract and the laws. The social contract and the laws are sacred. And lastly, only one negative dogma, which is intolerance. That all religions must be tolerated, and the only ones which will not be tolerated are the ones that do not tolerate others. This is what he talks about. Again, this is paragraph 33 of chapter 8 of the last book of the social contract of civil religion. Now, again, this is often not the place where people start talking about the social contract, but this is the place I want to begin. Because it's important. You have to get all these problems out of the way before you can make the social contract. Because covenants without swords are but words. Right? So without a mechanism to enforce the social contract cannot enforce itself. And these are the mechanisms. This is point zero, if you want. He will also talk about censorship. And this is, again, this is the root of the charge. Rousseau, the fascist, right? Because he talks about the civic religion, state worship. And he also talks about censorship. And censorship is, again, very importantly, Rousseau says that censorship can only be used to prevent morals from decaying. You cannot rejuvenate morals through censorship. So it's basically like, I don't know, I mean, it will not sound very nice to you, probably, but what Rousseau is talking about is, some kind of moral police, that not all offenses should be punished by law, but certain moral transgressions should be supervised by the censorial office. And the censorial office also has the right to intervene in terms of restricting freedom of speech or publication, or if you want theatrical performances, etc., etc. So this could remind you, especially if you paid attention last year, of Plato's censorship of the arts. Plato's censorship of the arts. And in some sense, the reason why Rousseau says this, and the reason why this is not stupid, I think, in the end of the day, and not really totalitarian, is because you got to understand the choice is not, and again, this is everything. I mean, we keep talking about positive and negative freedom, and this is one of the points. You see, it's like if the state does not censor, or I don't want to say state, okay, if society does not censor the cultural production and behavior, right? Then it means that individual people acquire this power. So it's like freedom is not in the cards. We cannot go back to the state of nature. It's either society will decide what you watch, or the corporations will decide what you watch. You see, junk food is not freedom. Some people say, oh, negative freedom, or positive freedom, I don't let my children eat junk food. See, junk food does not grow on trees. There are corporations which make money off your children. And it's not a question of should you let your children be free to eat junk food, or should you censor them? No, it's like who's going to control the behavior of your children? You as a parent or the corporations? So this is always the problem with negative freedom, that it leaves people in a position to be exploited by their own passions, and we'll talk about this in a second, because for Rousseau, the only real freedom of a man is obedience to the law that one has rationally prescribed to oneself. We'll talk about this in a second. But more importantly, right? So unless you are positively free, you can be either a slave to passion or much worse, slave to other people. So again, Rousseau wants to say we have to obey laws in order to not obey men. Obey laws, not men. Obey society, not corporations. Again, it's like Boucher is going to talk about dependence a lot. So we, human beings, in the state of nature, we did not depend on anything. We only depend on our environment. Our environment provided everything we needed. But today, you cannot live alone. I cannot live alone. I cannot grow my food. I cannot take care of my wounds. So I have to be dependent. And the question is, are you going to be dependent on the evil contract, on people who try to exploit and take advantage of you? Or are you going to be dependent on the most impartial institutions of all, which is society itself? So this is like the basic idea. I'm not sure if this is totally clear, but I want you at least to get a feel for the style of thinking that Rousseau engages in. Okay, let's continue. So once you get these kinds of people, and again, keeping in mind that unfortunately even the best social contract will not survive forever, because if Sparta and Rome had fallen, everybody will fall. And again, actually, immediately, when we talk about Hegel also believes in the Lawgiver, but he says it's not a miracle. There's history, historical process, and more specifically, like a quasi-Darwinian natural selection in Hegel. So this is a problem for Rousseau, but this problem has a solution outside Rousseau. And you see, it shows the genius of Rousseau to be able to pinpoint the problem and work around the problem which he could not solve, which later generations filled in for him, like Hegel. And this is, again, one good reason to talk about Hegel after we talk about Rousseau. Anyway, so when we talk about the true social contract, but again, contracts do not enforce themselves. You need these kinds of people to make the social contract. So again, the first thing is that you will protect the person and property. And Rousseau is clear about this. He says, in the state of nature, there is no property. So basically, all property on some important level is theft. So the only thing that can make your property not be a theft is if you are a member of a social contract. Now, vis-a-vis other states, obviously. States, so again, same Hobbesian rules apply. Vis-a-vis other states, with respect to other states. So let's say if we are Geneva, you Germans, you're all thieves. You have stolen something from the state of nature, and you are keeping it only as long as you can hold on to it with the force of arms. So in the international relations, there is no absolute right of property. Right of property is basically just the right of the strongest, somebody who can protect property. But within the social contract, it is only the social contract that can give you property rights and guarantee your property rights. So anyway, so the first thing that the social contract does is, again, it is a form of association which will protect the person and goods, person and property of each associate. And secondly, it says each uniting with all, nevertheless obeys only himself and remains as free as before. And the way I like to phrase this is each obeys only himself and remains as free as before. How is social order possible if we obey only ourselves? Each person obeys only himself. Well, that is because, again, remember, we talked about the common interest. There is one objectively correct answer as to what is our common interest. If we don't have a common interest, society is impossible. But to the extent that we have a common interest, there's one right answer, and everybody agrees to this one right answer. So 2 plus 2 is objectively equal to 4, everybody agrees. And that's why, you see, like in mathematics, think about this. In mathematics, each mathematician obeys only himself and remains as free as before, and yet we can have math. Why? Because there are rules, there are laws, and everybody comes to the same conclusion. At least by and large, right? So in this, Rousseau imagines this similar thing with respect to the social contract. Again, each person obeys himself, but there's one right decision. And that's how we can be as free as before and have order at the same time. So like one objective solution. It's like, again, traffic laws. I gave this example before, but let's give it again. Like I drive, many of you will drive. Most of the time, I obey the traffic laws, not because I'm afraid I'll be punished. This is not a fool's problem, because this is genuinely in my own self-interest. Selfish, narrow self-interest. Because otherwise, driving is just dangerous and you can get killed. And it's not a question of fine or policeman or whatever, or you getting your driver's license revoked. No, it's just a question of your physical safety. Yeah, so...
The common interest for everyone is what? To even...
Rousseau doesn't really... I don't think that Rousseau really specifies this all that, in detail. But, it's like your common interest is safety, security, be fed, be free, protected from the outside world. Those kinds of things. I mean, like, approximately the same things you wanted in the state of nature. Like self-preservation, comfort, stable families, that kind of thing. Yeah. So, then, let's also talk about this. So again, let's talk about freedom. So this is chapter 7 of the Sovereign, I hope. It's chapter 8 of the Civil State. Apologies. So chapter 8 of the Civil State, first couple paragraphs. This transition from the state of nature to the civil state produces a most remarkable change in man by substituting justice for instinct, and giving his actions morality which they previously lacked. So the voice of duty succeeds physical impulsion, right succeeds appetite, and man used to only look to himself, and now he's forced to act on other principles and consults his reason before listening to his appetites. Reason before listening to his appetites. And he says, yes, man loses certain things when he enters into society, but in general, what he gains is so much more. So much so that he should ceaselessly bless the happy moment which wrested him from the state of nature forever, out of a stupid and bounded animal, made an intelligent being and a man. So yes, I mean, in this phrase we see the citizen is higher than the savage. Again, as he says, that the citizen should ceaselessly bless the moment when he stopped being the savage, if you want, and out of a stupid and bounded animal, the true social contract made him an intelligent being and a man. Let us reduce, this is paragraph 2, let us reduce the entire balance of terms such that it's easy to compare. So let's have a vivid comparison. What man loses by the social contract is his natural freedom. What is natural freedom? It is an unlimited right to everything that tempts him and that he can reach. So we lose our natural freedom, which is an unlimited right to everything that tempts us and that we can reach. Does this remind you of anybody? Reminds you of anybody? Natural right to everything that tempts you and that you can reach. Everything that tempts. Yes, that tempt. How do you say? Соблазняет in Russian, right? Everything that interests you. Yes, compared to right to all things. Yeah, this is very similar. So this is something that you lose for more or less Hobbesian reasons. But what you gain is civil freedom and moral freedom. So civil freedom is this. It says civil freedom and property in everything he possesses. In order not to be mistaken about these compensations, one has to distinguish clearly between natural freedom, which has no other bounds than the individual forces, and civil freedom, which is limited by the general will, and between possession, which is merely the effect of force, or the right of the first occupant, and property, which can only be founded on a positive title. So basically, civil freedom, if you want, gives you, through the general will, voluntary right? It gives you rights. Again, in the state of nature, I could take whatever I want and keep it as long as I can hold on to it. But if another person comes in and smacks me on the head, he can take it away from me. Civil freedom is no, I have a right to this phone, for example, or to this tablet, through the general will, and you cannot take it away from me. But in addition, much more, so civil freedom is my genuine freedom in terms of right. Freedom or right to have property, freedom of movement, freedom of speech, freedom of voting, which is guaranteed by the general will. But the second one is much more important, is the moral freedom. And you get both. So you get two for the price of one. And he says the moral freedom alone makes man truly the master of himself. Rousseau says, the impulsion of mere appetite is slavery, whereas the obedience to the law that one has prescribed to oneself alone is freedom. So this one, basically, Rousseau says, is not really freedom at all. This is just slavery to passions. And in the evil contract, the bourgeois are slaves to passion. But the moral freedom alone makes man master of himself. And this freedom is obedience to the law that you have prescribed to yourself. Obedience to self-prescribed law. So this is not Orwell. Obedience is freedom, right? This is not Orwell, right? This is, again, the idea is that you can either be a slave to your appetites and just be like a child or some kind of psychopath who just sort of cannot control themselves. Or you can bind yourself by what you have rationally prescribed you should do with your life. So, I mean, again, so bad to give examples, myself as an example, whatever. I mean, I woke up this morning and my moral freedom tells me that I want to give a class on Rousseau. I enjoy Rousseau, reading immensely. I enjoy, teaching this course in general. This is like a part of my identity, which I have consciously chosen, having other options, open to me. So this is consciously something that I enjoy, something that fulfills me. If I was a slave to passions, I wouldn't be here. Because along the road from my house to the university, there would be a million temptations. Have a cup of coffee, get some gum, get a cake, I don't know, go, whatever. Like, the example I usually give, take my clothes off and just start rolling down the floor and, bubbles coming out of my mouth. Whatnot, it would be like a child. So obedience to the law that I have prescribed to myself, that alone is freedom. And it's very important, obedience to the law that you have prescribed to yourself, not imposed from the outside. Forcing to be free and forcing are different things. Like in the evil contract, of course, people are simply forced. But in the true social contract, in the ideal situation, this, how do you call this? Abstract social contract in a vacuum, right? Spherical social contract in a vacuum. Nobody's ever forced to do anything. People obey the law of reason within them. Okay, so, and this is the basic idea of the social contract. Let's continue, and we need to talk about the general will, and we also need to talk about the establishing of this whole situation. Let's start with the procedure of how do we establish this. So Rousseau, and I mean I should probably double check, but I'm fairly certain Rousseau, against Hobbes, actually believes that if you want to establish a true social contract, there needs to be a real meeting of people where they explicitly set up the social contracts. This is chapter 5 of book 1, which is called One Always Has to Go Back to a First Convention. That the true social contract has to really go back to a first convention. So indeed, at some point in the ancient past, a group of people had to get together, convene. And on this convention, they had to unanimously, now this is very important, unanimously decide to be bound by the social contract. The signing of the social contract has to be unanimous. If you don't want to sign the social contract, well, you're an enemy, we kill you or something like that. But you're not a member of our society. We kill you or banish you or just go take a hike. So, but the signing of the social contract has to be unanimous. And what people do, remember, we are talking about these people, the bootstrap problem. The problem of Münchhausen. How can you pull yourself up by the bootstraps? How do you say bootstrap in Russian? I have no idea. So, вытягивать себя за волосы из болота, right? So what people actually do is, again, the political power. Who is the sovereign for Rousseau? The people in their collective capacity, always. Only the people are inalienably sovereign. Sovereignty cannot be alienated, it cannot be delegated, it cannot be divided. So, cannot be alienated. I don't know, let's write this here. Can't alienate, delegate, or divide sovereignty.
They agree on this.
They agree on this.
Oh yes, absolutely. No, I mean, no. What they agree to is that, but at the same time, we have this Münchhausen problem. How can they make the laws? They're savages or barbarians or who knows. So you need a lawgiver, but lawgiver has no power. All the political power completely lies with the people because their sovereignty cannot be alienated, delegated, or divided. So what the people do is they freely choose to adopt the laws that the lawgiver proposes. This is what happens. Without really understanding why these laws are good.
So this is on the second stage, right?
Yeah, I would imagine that this is probably the third stage. You agree to the laws. First convention.
But is unanimously a separate stage? Convention?
Says me being pedantic, but let me look this up. So, yeah, you have to unanimously establish the majority rule.
Because convening
You have to unanimously establish the majority rule. This is what Rousseau writes. You have to unanimously agree to be ruled by the majority. And then the majority is enough to agree with the laws.
So first we in generally convene, and then we establish a majority rule.
These numbers, 1, 2, 3, they do not mean anything. I just imagine them out of my head. You don't write this. Oh, there are 3 stages.
And the third is
Agree to the laws which are proposed by the lawgiver. Because people themselves cannot propose the law. So, let's finish with the political arrangement, and then we'll talk about the general will, because general will is a very important topic. So, basically, the arrangement looks like this. So we have the people, and they are supreme and sovereign. So this would be the sovereign assembly. The sovereign assembly. Again, real life examples. Let's say Athenian ecclesia. Every citizen has the right to come and talk, and if at least 6,000 people come, which was the quorum back in the day, you can make any decision whatsoever. Completely any decision whatsoever. Like the assembly is not bound by anybody. And then it's important. But for Rousseau, strictly speaking, this sovereign assembly should only make general laws. General laws. And then the execution of these general laws or application of them to particular cases is delegated to the executive branch. Right, executive. So, in this sense, from the standpoint of legislature, well, first of all, this is not separation of powers. It's a subordination of powers. Because the supreme power is legislative power and it belongs to the people. And then the legislature appoints the executive. Yeah, so from the standpoint of legislation, all republics, and again, so we keep talking about the true social contract, an alternative word for this is republic. Republic. From Latin, res publica, public thing, right? Public matter. Some of you may know that the etymological translation of the word republic into English is commonwealth. So, yeah, publica, res publica, common matter, common affair, commonwealth. Okay. Anyway, so from the standpoint of legislation, every republic is a direct participatory democracy. From the standpoint of legislation, every legitimate republic is a direct participatory democracy. Mm-hmm. But from the standpoint of the executive, you can have a monarchy, an aristocracy, or a democracy, or some mixed regime, who cares? So the usual, monarchy, aristocracy, democracy. So, how can a monarchy be a republic? How can a monarchy be a republic?
There is the social contract with the sovereign.
No, the sovereign is the people. The sovereign assembly.
The monarch, I mean, the monarch. Like
Yeah.
The monarch has obligations.
Yeah, the sovereign assembly appoints the monarch. And again, you have no rights against the sovereign. So the monarch has no rights against the sovereign. So the sovereign assembly appoints the monarch, or the monarchical dynasty, whatever they want. And this monarch is tasked with executing the laws which the people have made.
It's purely executive.
Purely executive, yeah. His task is only to apply the laws which the people have made. And Rousseau says, well, you will read this, first class honors, read this carefully, because Rousseau talks about the pluses and the minuses of monarchy, aristocracy, and democracy. And like Montesquieu, Rousseau believes that different places, different temperaments, and different climates favor different regimes. And he says, in certain circumstances, monarchy is best. In certain circumstances, democracy is best. But what he says, like in general, on par, so again, in different circumstances, different regimes can be better. But if you look at all regimes, monarchy, it's like least good, it's like most open to abuses for Rousseau. And democracy would be best if people were good. He says, if people were angels, democracy would be the best regime. But because people are not angels, the best regime is probably elective aristocracy. On par, like on average. This is his preferred regime. And elective aristocracy kind of vaguely should resemble what we have in Russia today. Not exactly, but sort of. So again, it's like if you imagine an Athenian assembly which makes the laws, and then you have elective magistrates who put these laws into practice. Like in Athens, you have generals. You elect generals. I think they elected 10 generals, something like that. And also, very importantly, Rousseau imagines that for in a general case, in a stable, good, true social contract, there will be few laws. These laws will almost never change, and you will almost never need to add new laws. Yeah. Laws have to be few, more or less changeless, and more or less no new laws. And Rousseau says that when you have many laws, or when people propose new laws, this is probably a sign that something is going south, that your society is degenerating, and you have this faction. And again, like, when you think of Rousseau, do not think of Stalin.
But that presumes that the initial general laws are more or less perfect.
Yes.
And they're given to us by the lawgiver.
Yes. So it's a miracle, and what can you do? It's complicated.
You can't change the lawgiver. I mean, does the lawgiver...
The lawgiver has no power. The lawgiver has absolutely no power.
I mean, can we...
No new laws. Or few new laws. Okay, like few new laws.
Can a new lawgiver appear throughout the
Well, I mean, why not? Yes. But Rousseau is just like, okay, our society is going down the drain, everything is bad, but then new lawgiver appears and we will assent to his laws. Rousseau thinks no, because people will not want to make good laws. They will want to make factional laws which suit themselves at the detriment of everybody else.
Like a little question, where is the lawgiver structure?
Nowhere. He has no political power.
Nice.
He gives advice to the people and they follow of their
Like
own.
a first mover.
A little bit, maybe. Well, he's like this prophet in the wilderness. He comes and he talks to people, and if they want to listen, they listen to him. Huh?
And then he speaks.
Well, probably yes. I mean, in historical case of Lycurgus and Moses, yeah, they just die in the next generation. Huh?
I'm sorry, why new laws in degradation but not development?
Well, again, I mean, you can have new laws, but few, because Rousseau, again, people. So Rousseau, and this, I mean, Hegel is going to give an answer to all these questions in 3 weeks. But Rousseau imagines, what does he imagine? Again, do not think of Stalin, do not think of the gulags or Hitler. Think about a small rural agricultural community, whichever you prefer. Imagine, colonists of North America before the war with France and all that kind of thing. Like you live in a small township. Everybody knows everybody else. And you don't have many laws, and these laws are more or less clear. And it's like, Rousseau says, he talks about this, peasants deliberating under an oak tree. And he says, one person stands up and proposes a law, and what he says, everybody else already had in their mind. And they just agree with what he said, not because he persuaded them, but because everybody had the same solution. So if you imagine a small, simple society in which all the questions are easy to resolve, within your sphere of your technological possibility. I don't know, it's like, imagine a small agricultural community, like 20 families, and there's a flood. You get to a town assembly, and it doesn't matter which person says it's first. Somebody's going to say, we need to go and drain the flood. He's not the magistrate or the lawgiver or whatever. Everybody else already agrees, and they just go take shovels and go drain it. Because it is very obviously in their own common interest. Something like that. So, maybe I should talk about this right now. So, let's talk about the general will. So when we talk about the general will, we need to keep in mind that there is 3 wills to keep track of in Rousseau. So let's start. Well, the first one is the individual will. The second one is the corporate will. And the third one is the general will. So, and again, understand, society has no consciousness. Society does not have a soul. So society does not have a will. So the general will is my general will. What if my general will does not coincide with your general will? It means that we do not have a general will. General will is common interest. If they do not coincide, it means there is no common interest, there is no society, and we're at war. But to the extent that there is a general will, it is my general will. So again, Klosko gives this example. Well, again, let's continue with this example. There's a flood and in our small community. And we all know that we have to go and dig ditches. But one person, his house is on the hill, and his land is not flooded. And his individual will tells him, let's just shirk this time. Let's pretend to be sick or something like that. In your own selfish, narrow interest, myopic, narrow-sighted interest, you want to shirk the duty. This is not a good idea, says Rousseau. Because if everybody does this, society collapses. So your house is on the hill, you don't want to dig ditches, but maybe next time something's going to happen to you. Or maybe next week the Indians are going to come and attack your settlement. You need the social cohesion. Society protects you, society nurtures you. So it is in your interest to keep society moving. So it is actually in your general will. It is in your general will to go and dig the ditch. And this is, so what you have inside of yourself is you have a conflict between this sort of slavery to passions, if you want, this narrow-minded, short-sighted individual will, and the rational, long-term general will. I hope I said this correctly. Now, you could also have, in a horrible situation, if you have factions, you can also have this corporate will. And the corporate will is exactly the general will, but it's a general will of a faction. I do not want to give this example, but it keeps popping up in my head. So running the risk of being too controversial and throwing class out the window, Donald Trump, the general will of the capitalist class, of the extremely wealthy, makes laws, not necessarily his own individual will, but makes laws which are certainly against the general will, certainly against the majority of the population, but maybe top 1% or top 0.01% benefit from them greatly. This is the corporate will. And this is why Rousseau is against factions. He says you should either have no factions, or you should have so many and so diverse factions that they do not really impact, like you have so many corporations that do not have any real political impact on society. And for the same reason, you need to have approximate economic equality. Because if some people are extremely rich and some people are extremely poor, they lose this commonality of interest. Because again, in this community of farmers, the poor farmers are affected by the flood in a different measure from the rich farmers. And you see, when you think about this, again, think about this not as prescription. Because what is Rousseau saying? Should we burn down this building and go and live in a farming community? Well, by the way, incidentally, some people took Rousseau to mean that. And probably the most important expression of these real social experiments are you can probably come up with some hippie communes. The one that's usually given is the Israeli kibbutz movement. I'm not sure if it's the best example, but this is what people usually talk about. Anyway, but, forget about all this. What is Rousseau talking about? Imagine Rousseau like a chemist. And he's trying to isolate some kind of pure gas, argon, for example, and just study its properties. So what Rousseau is giving to you is he's giving the idealized version, the idealized model in which everything works smoothly. And then, when we look at our society, we can compare it to his idealized model, and it will be. So, and you can range societies, by degree of their, approximation to his idealized model. And you can also ask this question. So Rousseau thinks that you cannot really have the general will if your country is too large or not homogeneous. But he doesn't say it's geometrically impossible. He just says, look, the problem is that you will not have sufficient commonality of interest. But if you could have some mechanism that will ensure commonality of interest, like Hegel's Rechtsstaat, for example, then maybe you can have a general will in a large population. Or if you have this Marxist, this anarchist system of councils, maybe you can have a general will all throughout the globe, in the world. So again, Rousseau is useful in this sense. It's useful to understand what he's trying to say, and he's giving us a tool, a thought experiment, which is useful, but I suppose also limited to some extent. So let's kind of not demand from Rousseau too much. Anyway, so you have the individual will, the corporate will, and the general will. And again, imagine a transgression. Imagine I killed somebody. And I talked about this, right? So, and I stand up in court. Rousseau says, in a normal, well-functioning society, I will have this internal conflict. The individual will tell me, please let the judges be corrupt. Let the jury be stupid and let me go. But my general will says, no, I do not want to live in a society in which people get away with murder. So it is my general will that tells me that anybody who murders should be punished. So when I am being sentenced, I am actually forced to be free. Forced to obey the general will. Forced to be free. Which alone is freedom. Because if I'm not forced to be free, then society degenerates to war against all and we're better off dead. So it is, in some sense, in some weird sense, in my interest, long-term rational self-interest, as a criminal to be punished. And that's how you're forcing me to be free. So in some sense, again, this is a strange example of whatever, I'll stick with it. So forcing a criminal to go to prison is the same thing as forcing a child to not drink bleach. You are forcing the child to behave in their self-interest. And it presupposes a failure of rationality. If you are perfectly rational, so perfectly free in this moral sense of freedom, obey the law that you prescribe to yourself, you'll never be a criminal. And you will never sit on the bench in a courtroom. You will never have to be forced to be free because you're already free.
What if I think, what if I have an expectation that I'm going to die in that prison?
Well, this is why we have this wonderful formula.
Or will it mean that we collapse back to the evil conscience and then it's better to be dead?
Yeah, so in prison, even if I die in prison, it's still better than. It's still better than school. But no, I mean, Rousseau takes this very seriously. Like, if I have been sentenced to death, it's better to die honorably in public execution in the social contract than to live outside the social contract. This is his basic idea.
When general will is like, we need general will to have a true social contract. Or it appears.
Yeah, I suppose like these are two flip sides of the same coin. Like the general will is the characteristic of the true social contract.
So when
Like it is an integral element of the true social contract.
So when the true social contract appears, general will appears. And if we don't have general will, then we don't have true social contract.
Yes. And the general will, to oversimplify, simply refers to common interest. Which is, because it is common, has to be equal in me and you and in everybody else. Because if it's not equal, then it's not common. Yeah. So again, if I have murdered, my individual will says, please let the judges be corrupt, but my general will says, no, everybody who murders has to be punished. And this could remind, has any of you heard of John Rawls? John Rawls. Maybe. This is exactly Rawls' idea of the veil of ignorance. John Rawls is, let me just write this in brackets. John Rawls is a very prominent political philosopher of the, actually second half, post-Cold War American political philosophy. And he takes his bearing from Rousseau and Kant. And he wrote Theory of Justice, basically, if you want to oversimplify, defending Rousseau's ideas. Although, I think John Rawls is both in Boucher and in Kant, or at least in one of them. He's really important in the 20th century. Anyway, so you have the individual will and the general, and you also could have corporate will. And corporate will is a big problem, because let's imagine you have, Catholics and Protestants within one country. And Catholics break the law, which benefits all other Catholics. And that's like the road down to the war, to civil war. Which is why, again, like, I would imagine that corporate will is probably most of the time the biggest destabilizing factor in any society. Corporate will is probably the biggest destabilizing factor in any society. When a group of the population takes advantage of the social, like, imagine the kind of plutocratic oligarchy or military dictatorship, where a group of the population take their own interests and just then impose themselves on society. This is like.
Why does it even exist? It contradicts the idea of general.
But it will exist if your society is not homogeneous. If your society is not homogeneous, it will exist. It will arise, and this will be a problem. That's why your society has to be homogeneous. That's why you need a lawgiver. That's why you need censorship.
So in a true social contract, it doesn't exist.
It's
a general will.
Yeah, So in the true social contract, I'll explain in a second. But it's like this is Rousseau anti-multiculturalist. Multiculturalism will not work. So in the true social contract, in the ideal circumstance, and the ideal circumstance, you remember, is democracy. Is that the general will is, the will of the assembly. But then, in a democracy, every person is an executive of the law. So the corporate will of the executive completely coincides with the general will. So in the ideal circumstance, my corporate will coincides with my general will. And my individual will, I suppose, as well. But no, of course, individual will, in terms of this short-sighted, myopic interest, there's always, incentive to, be slaves to appetite, and, like sleep in, whatever. Not do your duty properly. And this is why Rousseau thinks that monarchy is a bad idea. Because he says, in monarchy, the corporate will of the king is basically equal to his is equal to his individual will. The corporate will of the king is equal to his individual will and is as far away as possible from the general will of the community. And this is why democracy is the most perfect form of government. But it's hard to achieve because people really need to be virtuous in the sense of the word virtue.
But if we're in a monarchy, we can have individual will, but we still should follow general.
Yeah, okay, so when we talk about monarchy, this is not like real monarchy. This is sort of, it's like, Pliny says to Trajan. Pliny is a Roman historian and Trajan is a Roman emperor. He says, I have a prince so as not to have a master. I have a prince so as not to have a master. So basically, I am protected by the first magistrate so as not to be a slave. So again, the monarch is the chief magistrate. the chief executive of the laws which are given by the community. So his function, the king's function, is subordinate in this sense. And like, or maybe you can imagine like a small tribe and you have a chief, that kind of thing. And he's one person. Locke also talks about these people. He calls them godlike princes. And by the way, so the word, what does the word prince mean? Prince means first. First among equals. The word prince presupposes this notion that prince is not a king, is not a sovereign. Prince is just first among equals. Prince was a title that Caesar Augustus took to himself. Princeps, first among equals. So in some sense, yeah, that's what we're talking about. So, but there was a point I was going to make and I forgot. You were asking some questions, which was important, I feel. Oh yeah, tacit consent. So then, Rousseau says, although this is not a good idea, but in principle you could have, and he says, if your state is large, it's better ruled by a monarchy. So this doesn't sound good. Probably you will not have a true social contract. But let's imagine that you have, the 5 good emperors. Your emperor is Marcus Aurelius, so you can have the true social contract, and your emperor is Marcus Aurelius. And you can have a monarchy and have a true social contract. Then, Rousseau says, when the king legislates, when the king makes laws, he makes them in the name of the people, not presuming, but with their tacit consent. Let me write the word tacit consent somewhere on the board. Tacit consent. So again, Rousseau is very clear. Marcus Aurelius makes the law. Marcus Aurelius is not the sovereign. He's an appointed minister of the sovereign. He has no right to make the law. But the true sovereign, which is the people of Rome, have the power to stand up and vocally oppose this law. So if people have a chance to speak against the law, but do not speak against the law, then you can presume tacit consent. But only if, you can presume tacit consent of the people, only if the people had a chance to voice their grievances. So this is how a monarchy can be a republic and how the king can legislate. The king legislates with the tacit consent of the people. And like, in extreme circumstances, like it's theoretically possible, but probably it's not a good idea. Theoretically it's possible, like it's thinkable for Rousseau, that a monarchy can be a republic, but in reality, probably not. And none of the examples that he's going to give are like that. Because Rome, Republican Rome, Sparta, and Calvin's Geneva, all three were some form of democracy. Again, like mixed forms of democracy and aristocracy, basically. Sparta and Rome and Calvin's Geneva, because you had the General Assembly of all the citizens, but you also then had the Senate, the Senatus, right? What is Senate? Senate is the council of the elders, of the Soviet Federation, of the people who are older and wiser. So neither Rome, nor Sparta, nor Calvin's Geneva were complete democracies, direct democracy, because you had this, aristocratic elements in there as well. Not to mention that, again, Sparta had this very weird system, like a mixed regime between a monarchy, aristocracy, and democracy, and monarchy was they had dual kingship. They had 2 kings.
I missed the point. So the lawgiver doesn't have any power. So who is he?
So the lawgiver has no power. The monarch has power. Monarch's power is that he's a member of the executive appointed by the sovereign assembly. And if the sovereign is free to oppose the monarch, which it doesn't, then the monarch is free to make laws. And Hobbes, by the way, says the same thing. So unless the sovereign stops you from doing what you're doing, you're free to do that. Yeah, it's a very thin line. It is a very thin line. I understand. Yeah. So like on the extreme, it doesn't seem that there's a difference. But Rousseau would say that again, if people disagree, they will be free to oppose. They will speak up, and the king will be stopped. And that's why it's not derogation. And Rousseau explicitly says that in Britain, their system is like basically slavery. He says in Britain, people are slaves, and once every 4 years, they elect who's going to be their new masters. But the rest of the year, they're slaves. And what Parliament makes law, it's law. And people are not free to oppose the law which is made by Parliament.
He's against the combination of executive and legislative.
No, he is for the combination of the executive and the legislative. The best arrangement of all, the best arrangement is the combination of executive and legislative, which is called democracy. Democracy is when your legislature is also your executive, where every person is a magistrate.
No, but when you delegate, he says that according to him, the delegation of
Okay, but you cannot delegate legislative authority.
Yeah, exactly.
It's because the king legislates not in his own name. This authority is not be delegated to him. He just says out loud what the sovereign people think, and they are free to oppose him. Do not object. So by the way, so democracy, again, first class honors, read the whole book, Social Contract. He will talk about this. By the way, the book is fairly short. I have both the Social Contract and the Discourse printed. Yeah. So this is the Discourse, all of it. And this is the Social Contract, all of it. They're not particularly long. Anyway, so what he said, when you talk about democracy, how can every person be a magistrate? Somebody help us out. How can every person be a magistrate? You know, who's going to plow the fields if everybody's already a magistrate? Yes, did you say? Lottery. No. I'm mishearing what you're saying. This is the ancient Athenian system, where there's rotation and people are assigned to magistracy by lot. But this is why. It's only suitable if people were angels. Because it has to be that sort of every person is as good as every other person, will not abuse their office, that kind of thing. Allotment, like you imagine some kind of important public, like I don't know, how do you say it? Председатель municipaliteta, and this is assigned by lot every year, and a new person becomes председатель municipaliteta. And in Athens, they actually did that for almost all positions. Like the only positions which were not filled by lot, but were appointed directly by the assembly, were positions which really required a lot of skill, like generals, for example. Generals of the army were elected, not appointed by lot, but everybody else was. We have appointment by lot in Russia today. It's called jury trials for jury duty. Присяжные. Appointment через jury. Like in theory, in practice not really, but in theory yes. Yeah. But that's going to be the last thing I'm going to tell you. So I need to make sure that I'm not. Oh yeah. So one last thing, just for fun, because I'll forget otherwise. Rousseau talks about religion. When we mentioned civic religion, I meant to talk about this before. He talks about different kinds of religion. He says Catholicism, bad, horrible. Catholicism goes out the window. Why? Because Catholicism divides your loyalty. The citizen does not know whom to obey, the Pope or the King. That's why Catholicism goes out the window. Catholicism is bad. Then he also says Christianity of the Gospels, Christianity of Jesus, is also bad because it's a religion of the slaves. He says Christians are slaves, they know it and they're fine with it because this is not their world. They would just want to die and go to heaven. So he says the best religion for his money is pagan religion.
But who creates civil freedom? Civil religious source?
The Lawgiver.
The Lawgiver.
Well, maybe, I don't know, or maybe the society itself. Because remember, the civic religion is this broad religious frame, like in Hegel, it's a broad religious framework within which you can worship whoever you want, as long as you subscribe. So it's like, again, remember, you have to believe in providence, in провидение. You have to believe that good people are rewarded, bad people are punished, and you have to believe that laws are sacred. And if you believe that, you are free to be a Muslim, a Christian, a Buddhist, a Christianite, whatever. You can be worship whomever you want if you subscribe to this basic core doctrine. But yeah, he talks about this, how Christianity is the religion of the slaves. It's wonderful passages there. But again, and you can hear echoes of Machiavelli and Hobbes when Rousseau is talking about this. But that's probably it. I mean, I'm sure I forgot to mention a million other things, and we will need to read the books themselves carefully. But again, for next seminar, which is probably going to be on Friday, Klosko is your main. Anyway, people, we're out of time. If you have any questions.